What if the most disturbing trick in The Prestige is not the cloning machine? Not the twin reveal? Not even the final room full of tanks? What if the real trick is that the movie makes us care more about how the illusion works than about everyone destroyed by it? That is the part that starts to feel different after a rewatch. The first time through, the movie pulls you into the puzzle. You want to know how Borden does it. You want to know whether Angier can beat him. You want the secret because the whole story is built to make the secret feel like the prize. But The Prestige keeps doing something quieter underneath that. It keeps showing us a cost, then daring us to look past it. Cutter explains the structure of a magic trick early on: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige. It sounds like a clean explanation of stagecraft. First, you show the audience something ordinary. Then you make it disappear. Then you bring it back. That final return is what the audience really wants. They do not just want something to vanish. They want the comfort of seeing it restored. The movie uses that structure on us. It shows us people, identities, relationships, bodies, and then it makes them unstable. It gives us the feeling of a trick before we understand the damage hiding inside it. The opening field of top hats is not just a strange image. The bird trick is not just a small demonstration. Alan is not just a background presence. Sarah's confusion is not just relationship tension. These are pieces of the answer, but the movie places them where we are least prepared to value them. And that is where the film becomes more than a clever twist machine. It understands something about audiences. We say we want the truth, but we also want the feeling of wonder. We want the explanation, but not too early. We want to be fooled in a way that later makes us feel smart for solving it. That idea feels very close to modern American performance culture. We admire the person who appears successful, original, disciplined, undeniable. We see the stage version of someone and often treat it as the full person. The clean result gets rewarded. The hidden damage becomes private. The trick works, so the cost becomes easier to ignore. Angier and Borden are not just magicians in a period story. They are two different versions of a question that still feels current. What are you willing to sacrifice to be seen as exceptional? Borden gives up a normal life for a secret. Angier gives up himself for applause. And the audience, both inside the theater and outside the movie, keeps leaning forward because the illusion is too interesting to look away from. So the real secret may not be the method. The real secret may be why the method matters so much to them. Why victory matters more than peace. Why applause matters more than identity. Why the return of the man on stage feels more important than the person who disappeared to make that return possible. The Prestige does not simply hide the truth from us. It trains us to chase the wrong part of it. And once you notice that, the movie stops feeling like a puzzle that gets solved. It starts feeling like a question that keeps coming back. That is also why the opening works so well. It does not tell us to be suspicious. It makes us curious. Suspicion would keep us outside the trick. Curiosity invites us in. We watch Cutter. We watch the bird. We watch the stage. We learn the language of the illusion, and before we know it, we start behaving like the audience inside the movie. We are not asking who is being hurt yet. We are asking how the effect is done. And maybe that is the most honest thing the film understands about us. A clean result has power. A perfect reveal can make the messy parts feel secondary. The Prestige keeps that temptation alive for almost the entire movie, then turns it back on us. By the time the explanation arrives, the bigger question has already been waiting in plain sight. Why were we so willing to look away from the cost?
If the newspapers are right and you are for the draw.
He's a magician, ask him.
I ask again that this man...
At first, the rivalry between Angier and Borden looks almost professional. Two men work in the same world. Both care about craft. Both want to be better than the other. There is jealousy, pride, talent, and the kind of competitive pressure that can look normal from a distance. But the movie slowly changes the shape of that rivalry. It stops being about who can become great. It becomes about who can make the other man feel small. That shift matters. Angier begins with grief and anger. Julia's death gives him a wound that he cannot close, partly because he cannot fully answer what happened. Which knot did Borden tie? Was it a mistake? Was it arrogance? Was it carelessness? Angier turns that uncertainty into fuel. He wants justice, but he also wants a target. And Borden becomes the person who carries all of that pain. Borden's obsession is different. He is not as polished as Angier. He is rougher, more guarded, more committed to the purity of the method. He believes in the secret so deeply that everything else has to bend around it. That can look admirable at first. He is disciplined. He is serious about the work. He is not only chasing applause. He wants the trick to be real, in the only way a stage trick can be real, protected, complete, impossible to steal. But that commitment is also where the danger lives. Borden does not just protect a trick. He builds a life around secrecy until the secret becomes more important than the people living next to it. The movie's careful not to make this a simple hero and villain story. Angier is not wrong to want wonder. Borden is not wrong to respect crowd. Both men start with desires that make sense. The horror is that neither of them knows how to stop once the desire begins taking over everything else. That is why their rivalry feels so familiar, even outside the world of magic. In American stories about success, competition often gets framed as proof of drive. You push harder. You outwork the other person. You become undeniable. But the prestige asks what happens when that mindset gets no limit. What happens when another person's achievement starts to feel like an attack on your identity? Angier needs to be seen. He needs the audience to confirm that he matters. Borden needs to remain unknowable. He needs a secret to prove that no one else can fully reach him. One man wants public validation. The other wants protected mastery. One wants the room to love him. The other wants the method to survive him. And both of them become trapped by the role they perform. That is the emotional engine of the movie. Not just that two magicians compete, but that competition becomes a substitute for self-understanding. Angier could grieve. Borden can tell the truth. Both could step away. But each new humiliation, each new trick, each new response makes stopping feel like losing. The sad part is that the closer they get to greatness, the less human their choices become. The stage gets cleaner. The tricks get bigger. The rivalry becomes legendary. But underneath all of that, two men are narrowing their lives until there is almost nothing left except the need to win. There is something very American in that fear of being outperformed. Not because competition belongs to one country, but because American storytelling often treats visible success as proof of worth. The person who rises, wins, reinvents, performs and refuses to quit is usually framed as admirable. The prestige takes that familiar shape and darkens it. It asks what happens when refusing to quit is no longer courage, but captivity. That is why Angier and Borden feel less like opposites and more like distorted reflections. Each man sees something in the other that he cannot tolerate. Angier sees a secret he cannot buy. Borden sees a showman whose polish threatens the value of raw method. Neither can let the other simply exist. Their obsession needs an audience, but it also needs an enemy. Without the enemy, They might have to face the emptiness underneath the performance.
In London, 7 times, you guessed every object.
The stage in The Prestige is where everyone looks. That is where the applause happens. That is where the impossible moment is supposed to live. But the movie's real sadness often happens somewhere quieter. It happens off stage. Sarah is the clearest example. Her relationship with Borden can seem like a side story the first time through, especially because the movie keeps pulling our attention toward the rivalry and the trick. But Sarah is one of the earliest people to understand the truth emotionally, even before the audience understands it logically. When she says that Borden loves her on some days and does not on others, the line feels painful even before it becomes a clue. She does not know the method. She does not have the language for what is happening. But she can feel the inconsistency. She lives with the cost of a secret that the audience will later treat as brilliant. That is one of the most devastating things about Borden's sacrifice. From the outside, it can look like the ultimate commitment to craft. 2 brothers sharing one public identity, each surrendering half a life so the illusion can stay perfect. It is extreme. It is disciplined. It is also deeply cruel to the people who are asked to live inside the consequences without being told the truth. Sarah is not watching the trick from a theater seat. She is living inside it. She is married to a performance. She experiences the confusion, the emotional absence, the shifting presence of a man who is both familiar and unreachable. And because she does not know the secret, she's left doubting herself. That turns the twist into something more than clever construction. It becomes a form of damage. Olivia is pulled into a different kind of damage. She becomes part of the rivalry's machinery, used by both men in different ways. Her loyalty, attraction, frustration, and intelligence all get folded into a contest that keeps making people into instruments. Angier and Borden do not always treat others as people with independent lives. More and more, they treat them as pieces on a board. Cutter sees some of this more clearly than most. He understands magic. He understands deception. He is not naive about what performance requires. But because he understands the craft, he can also sense when the craft has crossed a line. His warnings matter because they do not come from someone who hates illusion. They come from someone who knows illusion well enough to recognize when it has become morally rotten. This is where the movie connects strongly to a modern audience. Public success often has a private backstage. The polished version of a person can look impressive while the people close to them experience the instability, pressure, absence, and damage that made the polished version possible. The audience sees the return. The family sees what disappeared. That is why the movie becomes more tragic after the twist is solved. The answer does not simply explain the trick. It explains why Sarah felt so alone. It explains why Borden's life could never be simple. It explains why the secret was never contained to the stage. A great trick asks the audience to ignore what happens in the hidden space. The Prestige asks us to go back and look there. And when we do, the most painful part is not that we were fooled. It is that other people were paying for the illusion long before we understood it. This is why the movie's emotional clues matter as much as its plot clues. The missing fingers, Fallon, the duplicated hats, the bird cage, those are puzzle pieces. But Sarah's loneliness is also evidence. Olivia's frustration is also evidence. Cutter's unease is also evidence. The film is telling us that a trick is not only measured by whether the audience is fooled, it is also measured by what it does to the people standing closest to it. That makes the offstage world feel like the moral center of the film. The stage is where the question of method lives. The home is where the question of cost lives. And once you notice that separation, it becomes hard to see the tricks as purely beautiful. Every moment of public wonder has a private shadow attached to it.
Props from a Virgil at the hall.
Well, aren't you worried he'll steal your tricks?
He does. In his masterpiece. He's prepared to do it.
When Tesla enters the story, the Prestige changes its texture. Until then, the movie feels like a story about stagecraft, rivalry, bodies, timing, and deception. Then Angier goes searching for a machine, and suddenly the question is no longer just how far a magician can go. It becomes a question of what happens when the impossible actually works. Tesla does not give Angier a better illusion. He gives him a miracle that Angier is not ready to understand. That is what makes the machine so unsettling. It does not simply solve the problem. It reveals that Angier never really understood what his problem was. Angier wants Borden's result. He wants the impossible transport. He wants to stand in one place, vanish, and return somewhere else with the audience completely in his hand. But underneath that, he wants something more personal. He wants to beat Borden. He wants the wound to close. He wants applause to answer grief. He wants recognition to become proof that he mattered more. A machine can produce a duplicate. It cannot give him peace. That is why the Tesla machine is not just a plot device. It is the point where ambition becomes an identity crisis. The field of duplicated hats prepares us for the idea, but it looks almost quiet at first. Just hats. Objects. Repetition. Then we understand what the machine does to living beings, and the image becomes much darker. A copy is not just a copy when the copy can think, breathe, fear, and claim the same life. This is one reason the movie still feels current in the United States. We live in a culture that is increasingly surrounded by copies, cloned voices, AI images, digital doubles, synthetic performances, deepfakes, and versions of people that can circulate without the full person behind them. The Prestige is not predicting those technologies directly, and it does not need to. It is asking a deeper question that technology keeps making harder to avoid. If a copy looks right, sounds right, and performs correctly, what happens to the original? Angier's horror is that he turns that question into a routine. He does not solve the identity problem. He repeats it. Every performance creates the uncertainty again. Which Angier is real? Which Angier survives? Does the man stepping into the machine believe he will be the one who appears across the stage? Does the man in the tank realize too late that he was also Angier? The movie does not give us a clean philosophical answer, and that is part of the dread. Angier keeps using the machine because the show works. The audience sees the prestige. The method stays hidden. The applause comes back. That is enough for him to continue. But the machine also exposes the difference between Borden and Angier. Borden's sacrifice is practical, lifelong, intimate. Angier's is technological, repeated, and almost ritualistic. Borden divides a life. Angier duplicates and destroys one. Neither is innocent. Neither is clean. But Angier's shortcut is terrifying because it lets him keep the appearance of mastery while hiding a catastrophe under the stage. That feels like the dark side of technological power. Not technology as evil by itself, but technology as an amplifier of the person using it. Tesla gives Angier possibility. Angier turns that possibility into a system of self-destruction. The false miracle works. That is the problem. If it failed, Angier might have stopped. Because it succeeds, he can keep pretending the cost is part of the method. And once the cost becomes part of the method, almost anything can be justified. What makes this especially unsettling is that Angier can keep treating the problem as technical. If the machine works, then the trick works. If the trick works, then the applause comes. If the applause comes, then the cost can be hidden for one more night. That chain of logic is frightening because each step sounds almost reasonable from inside the obsession. But the movie keeps reminding us that technical success is not the same as moral success. Something can function perfectly and still be wrong. A system can produce the desired result and still be built on a horror no one should accept. Angier's machine is terrifying because it removes the last practical barrier between wanting recognition and manufacturing it at any cost.
Place where the performer's hand reaches through.
The prestige becomes even more uncomfortable when we stop treating the audience as background. The crowd inside the theater seems simple at first. They sit down, they watch, they gasp, they applaud, they leave. They do not know what happens beneath the stage. They do not know who is lying, who is dying, who is being replaced, or what kind of private wreckage made the performance possible. They only know whether the man came back. And if the man came back, the trick worked. That is a brutal little mirror. Because outside the movie, we often do something similar. We reward the visible result. We admire the person who appears polished, original, relentless, and successful. We talk about the final performance more than the private cost. If the output is impressive enough, the damage behind it can become invisible. Angier understands this better than anyone. He knows the audience does not only want magic. They want to feel the emotional rhythm of magic. They want doubt, then shock, then relief. They want a return. But Angier also needs the audience in a way that goes beyond craft. Their applause becomes personal proof. It tells him that he is not just performing well. He is winning. That is why root is such an important warning sign. Root can stand in for Angier physically. For the mechanics of the illusion, that should be enough. The audience does not need the real Angier in both places if the effect works. But Angier cannot accept that. He cannot stand the thought of another version of himself receiving the moment that feels like his validation. He wants the applause to belong to him, not just to the trick. That desire becomes dangerous because it is so recognizable. Many people understand the pressure to perform a version of themselves for an audience, at work, online, socially, creatively. The version that gets rewarded can slowly become the version that must be protected at all costs. The image starts to matter more than the inner life. The reaction becomes addictive. Applause does not have to happen in a theater. Sometimes it is attention, metrics, praise, status, visibility, the feeling that people are watching and confirming your place. The movie does not make that connection loudly. It does not need to. Angier's stage is enough. He keeps building a version of himself that can return perfectly, while hiding the version that has to disappear. And the audience keeps helping, not because they are evil, but because they want wonder. That is important. The prestige is not saying that audiences are bad for wanting to be amazed. Wonder is human. Illusion can be beautiful. A good trick can make the world feel larger for a moment. The problem begins when wonder becomes an excuse not to ask what the wonder costs. That is why Cutter's explanation matters so much. People do not really want to know how the trick works. Not fully. They want to be fooled. But they also want to feel safe inside the deception. They want the bird to come back. They want the man to return. They want the world restored before the curtain falls. The prestige keeps asking whether that desire is innocent. If the audience only celebrates the return, who pays attention to the disappearance? If we cheer the final image, what happens to the hidden body? If we admire the performance, do we become part of the machine that makes the performance worth repeating? That is the most uncomfortable part of the crowd. They are not just watching Angier and Borden. They are showing us how easily a clean result can make a terrible process feel acceptable. That is why the theater crowd matters beyond the period setting. They are not foolish because they are amazed. They are human because they are amazed. The discomfort comes from how easy it is for amazement to become a kind of permission. If the audience rises to its feet, if the applause is loud enough, if the story people tell afterward is good enough, then the hidden part of the process can remain hidden. Modern attention works in a similar rhythm. The finished image travels faster than the context. The performance reaches people who will never see the preparation, the pressure, the compromise, or the collapse. The prestige does not need phones or platforms to understand that dynamic. It only needs a stage and a crowd willing to believe that the return is the whole story.
But it took him 5 minutes to cough.
The ending of The Prestige gives us the thing we think we want, the answer. Borden's secret becomes clear. Angier's method becomes clear. The clues fall into place. The structure clicks. The movie delivers the kind of reveal that makes people immediately want to rewatch everything that came before. But the strange thing is that the answer does not feel like freedom. Borden's truth is that he and his twin brother built one public identity between them. The trick was not just a method. It was a life. One brother loved Sarah. One loved Olivia. One could be a father in a way the other could not fully be. Every ordinary human need had to be negotiated through the protection of the secret. Even injury had to be shared, because the performance demanded consistency. That is both brilliant and horrifying. Borden's commitment makes the trick possible, but it also turns life into a prison built around a role. He does not simply keep a secret. He becomes the secret. And the people around him are forced to suffer the consequences of a performance they never agreed to join. Angier's truth is different, and in some ways colder. The machine creates a duplicate. One Angier appears. One Angier drowns. The theater sees the impossible return. Under the stage, the price is sealed away. The method is not fake magic. It is real horror dressed as performance. That is why the final room of tanks hits so hard. It is not only a reveal of what happened. It is a record of how many times Angier decided the applause was worth doing it again. Each tank is not just evidence. It is a question. How many versions of himself did he treat as acceptable losses? How many times did the success of the trick make the death underneath feel manageable? The movie refuses to let either form of sacrifice look clean. Borden gives up a normal life. Angier gives up himself. Borden's sacrifice is long, social, and intimate. Angier's is repeated, physical, and existential. They are not the same, but both are terrifying because both men allow the trick to become bigger than the life it was supposed to serve. That is why victory looks so empty. Angier gets the audience. He gets the better spectacle. He gets the impossible effect. Borden protects the secret and, in one surviving form, gets to return to his daughter. There are pieces of success in the ending, but none of them feel whole. Because what would winning even mean here? If Angier beats Borden but destroys himself over and over, is that victory? If Borden preserves the trick but loses Sarah and fractures every part of his life, is that victory? If the audience is amazed, but only because they never see the bodies beneath the stage, is the wonder still innocent? The film gives us answers that explain the plot, but those answers do not heal the story. Julia is still gone. Sarah is still gone. Olivia has still been used. Cutter has still watched craft become cruelty. The surviving Borden still carries a life shaped by absence. And Angier, even in his final moments, seems trapped inside the need to make someone understand what he achieved. That is the tragedy of the Prestige. The men do not fail because their tricks fail. They fail because their tricks work too well. The better the illusion becomes, the more it allows them to avoid the question underneath it. Was it worth it? And by the end, the movie has made that question much harder to answer than the mystery itself. The final reveal also changes how we understand the word commitment. Before the ending, commitment can sound noble. These men are devoted. They are disciplined. They are willing to go further than anyone else. But the ending forces a harder distinction. Commitment to what? To craft or to ego? To wonder or to revenge? To meaning or to the need to be remembered? That distinction is what makes the ending linger. The film is not simply punishing ambition. It is asking what ambition becomes when it no longer answers to love, grief, responsibility, or reality. Angier and Borden both achieve something extraordinary. The tragedy is that extraordinary achievement is not the same thing as a life well lived. A magic trick promises return. That is why the prestige matters. Something disappears, and the audience waits for the world to be put back together. The bird comes back. The man appears. The impossible becomes safe because the ending restores what the middle took away. But the prestige keeps asking whether anything is ever truly restored. That is why the movie does not become weaker once the twist is known. Some twist stories lose their power after the first reveal. This one becomes sadder. The second time through, the clues are not just clever. They feel heavier. The bird trick becomes less cute. The hats in the field become less mysterious and more lonely. Sarah's pain becomes less like a subplot and more like a warning. Cutter's calm explanations sound less like stage wisdom and more like a moral map. The more clearly the trick works, the more clearly the cost appears. That is the strange emotional design of the movie. It gives us the pleasure of solving something, then leaves us with the discomfort of understanding it. We get the answer, but the answer does not return what was lost. It does not give Sarah her life back. It does not make Angier whole. It does not turn Borden's divided existence into something simple. It does not make the audience responsible in a direct way, but it does make our desire to watch feel less innocent. And maybe that is why the film still feels sharp in a culture built around performance. So much of modern life asks people to produce a version of themselves that can be recognized, liked, rewarded, remembered. The stage is not always a theater. Sometimes it is a job, a platform, a reputation, a personal brand, a polished identity that keeps needing to return on command. The prestige does not say that performance is always false. It is more interesting than that. Performance can be beautiful. Craft matters. Discipline matters. Wonder matters. But the movie keeps asking where the line is. When does dedication become disappearance? When does ambition become self-erasure? When does the applause stop being a response to the work and start becoming the reason someone keeps destroying themselves? Borden and Angier both wanted something real. That is what makes them tragic. They were not chasing nothing. They wanted mastery, wonder, recognition, meaning, maybe even a way to survive grief. But they allowed the role to become larger than the person living inside it. So when the final image settles, the question is not only who understood the trick. The deeper question is what the trick asked everyone to ignore. Maybe the prestige is not the return of the man. Maybe it is the return of the question. After all the secrets, after all the applause, after all the clever structure, what actually comes back? And what stays gone? That is why the last feeling of The Prestige is not shock, at least not only shock. It is a kind of quiet aftertaste. The movie has shown us the trick, explained the method, and revealed the cost, but it does not close the moral account for us. It leaves us with the uncomfortable space between admiration and greed. And maybe that is the reason the film keeps working years later. The mechanics are satisfying, but the feeling underneath them is harder to settle. We understand what happened. We understand how it happened. But the question that remains is not mechanical. It is human. If being seen requires losing yourself, what exactly has the audience been applauding?